Forget instant news updates. Your morning paper, printed hours ago, was the freshest information you'd get. Imagine planning a holiday involved visiting a travel agent, flipping through glossy brochures, and waiting days for confirmations. To find a phone number, you'd heft a thick directory, its pages filled with thousands of tiny names and numbers instead of just speaking into your phone. Sending a photograph to a relative across the country meant getting it developed, putting it in an envelope and posting it, a journey that could take a week. Number 10. Finding your way around town meant paper maps and asking strangers. Before the little blue dot on a screen told you where you were and where to go, navigating the world was a very different kind of adventure. If you were driving to a new city, or even just an unfamiliar part of your own, preparation was key. You'd likely pull out a large, folded paper map. These maps, often stored in the glove compartment of a car, were covered in a complex web of lines representing roads, with different colors and thicknesses indicating highways, main roads, and smaller streets. You'd trace your route with a finger, perhaps a pen, noting landmarks or major turns. Sometimes, a passenger would be the designated navigator, their job to call out directions from the maps spread across their lap. This often led to lively discussions, and occasionally, a few wrong turns. Getting lost was a more common experience. When it happened, the solution was simple. You'd pull over and ask someone for directions. This could be a pedestrian on the street, a shopkeeper, or someone at a gas station. These interactions were a normal part of travel, a brief connection with a local who could offer not just directions, but maybe even a tip for a good place to eat nearby. Learning a city's layout took time and repetition. You built a mental map through experience. Public transport users relied on printed timetables at bus stops or train stations. These schedules, sometimes confusing and subject to change, were the only way to know when your ride might arrive. Planning a journey across town might involve consulting several different timetables and a map to see how routes connected. For long-distance travel, road atlases were indispensable. These thick books contained page after page of detailed maps covering entire countries or regions. Hours could be spent before a big trip, plotting the most efficient or scenic path, marking overnight stops, and estimating driving times based on distances scaled from the map. There were no real-time traffic updates beyond what you might hear on the radio, which was often too late to avoid a jam. The simplicity lay in the tools paper, your own sense of direction, and the willingness to engage with the physical world and its inhabitants to find your way. Every journey was a minor exploration, and arriving at your destination often felt like a genuine accomplishment. The world felt larger, perhaps, because every unknown street corner held the potential for small discovery or a brief human connection. Number 9. Job hunting was all about pounding the pavement and crucified aids. Looking for a new job was a very hands-on, localized process. The primary tool for many job seekers was the humble newspaper. Tucked away in its many sections, usually towards the back, were the classified advertisements. Here, companies would list job openings, often in tiny print, to save space and money. You'd scan these columns, pen in hand, circling potential opportunities. The descriptions were brief: a job title, a few key requirements, and a phone number or an address to send your application. Another common method was simply pounding the pavement. This meant dressing in your best clothes and physically going to businesses to ask if they were hiring. You might drop off a pre-typed resume or fill out an application form on the spot. For certain industries, especially trades or retail, this was a very direct way to make an impression. Networking happened in person too. Career fairs, though perhaps less frequent, were valuable. More often, leads came through friends, family, or former colleagues who heard about an opening through word of mouth. University career service offices had notice boards pinned with opportunities and binders full of company information. Professional organizations often had their own newsletters or journals that listed specialized roles. Applying for a job usually involved typing a formal cover letter and a resume. Typewriters were the standard, and a single mistake might mean retyping the entire page. Photocopiers, while available, were not in every home, so making copies of your resume might involve a trip to a local print shop or library. Once your application package was assembled, you'd mail it off, or sometimes deliver it by hand. Then, the waiting began. There were no instant email confirmations of receipt. Weeks could pass before you heard anything, often via a letter or a phone call inviting you for an interview. The process was slower, more deliberate. It required patience and persistence. The simplicity was in the focused channels, newspapers, direct visits, and personal connections. Your job search was largely confined to your geographic area, unless you were prepared to buy newspapers from other cities or rely on more specialized national publications. The tangible nature of applications, paper resumes, signed letters, made each one feel like a significant effort. Number 8. Staying in touch meant letters, long-distance calls, and waiting. Communication across distances before the internet was a practice in patience and intentionality. If you wanted to share news, thoughts, or feelings with someone far away, the most common method was writing a letter. This involved sitting down with pen and paper, carefully composing your message. The act of writing itself was often a reflective process. Once finished, the letter was folded, placed in an envelope, a stamp was affixed, and then it was taken to a post office or a mailbox. Depending on the distance, it could take days or even weeks for your letter to reach its recipient. Then you'd wait for a reply, which would undertake the same journey in reverse. Receiving a letter was often a small event, something to look forward to. The handwriting, the paper, the stamp from a distant place all added a personal touch. For more immediate, though more expensive communication, there was the telephone. Long-distance calls, especially across countries, were a significant cost. People were often mindful of the ticking minutes, so conversations might be more focused, planned to convey important news or arrange future plans. Calls were usually made from home landlines, and you had to hope the person you were calling was also at home to receive it. There were no voice emails as we know them. If no one answered, you simply had to try again later. Answering machines became more common over time, allowing callers to leave a brief message, but it wasn't an interactive process. For very urgent messages, a telegram service was available. You would dictate a short message to an operator, and it would be transmitted and then delivered as a typed note, often by a messenger. Telegrams were used for very important news, like births, deaths, or emergencies, due to their cost and sense of gravity. Keeping up with a wide circle of friends or family required individual effort for each relationship, separate letters, distinct phone calls. There was no broadcasting a life update to everyone at once. The simplicity stemmed from the limited channels and the inherent delays. Communication was less frequent, but often more substantive. Each interaction was a deliberate act, planned and executed with a certain level of care because of the effort or expense involved. The rhythm of connection was slower paced by postal services and the availability of people at the other end of a phone line. Number 7. Shopping meant Main Street, malls, or mail order magic. Getting your hands on the things you needed or wanted was an expedition into the physical world of commerce. Local high streets or main streets were bustling hubs. You'd walk from the butcher to the baker, the greengrocer to the hardware store. Shopkeepers often knew their regular customers by name and could offer personalized advice. Payment was typically in cash, or perhaps a check. Credit cards existed, but weren't as universally used for everyday small purchases. For a wider selection, especially of clothing, electronics, or department store goods, people flocked to shopping malls. These enclosed spaces offered a variety of stores under one roof, along with food courts and sometimes even cinemas. A trip to the mall could be an entire day's outing, a social activity as much as a shopping one. You'd try on clothes in fitting rooms, compare products side by side, and carry your purchases home with you immediately. If you couldn't find what you wanted locally, or if you lived in a more remote area, mail-order catalogs were a window to a world of goods. Companies like Sears or Montgomery Ward produced enormous glossy catalogs, sometimes hundreds of pages thick, filled with everything from fashion and furniture to tools and toys. Families would pore over these wish books, especially before holidays. To order, you'd fill out an order form often found at the back of the catalog, listing item numbers, sizes, and colors. You'd include a check or money order and mail it in. Then came the wait, often several weeks, before a package would arrive at your doorstep. The excitement of that delivery was considerable. Returns were also done by mail, a process that required repackaging the item and another trip to the post office. There was no instant price comparison across dozens of retailers. You compared prices between the stores you could physically visit or the catalogs you had on hand. Sales were advertised in newspapers or through flyers in your mailbox. The simplicity was in the directness of the transaction. You saw it, you touched it, or saw a picture of it. You bought it, you took it home, or you waited for its singular anticipated arrival. Choices were limited to what was physically accessible or offered in the catalogs you possessed, which streamlined the decision-making process. Number 6. Entertainment was a paired, scheduled experience. Finding something to watch or listen to was often a communal or family activity, dictated by schedules set by broadcasters and theaters. Television programming was limited. Most households had access to a handful of channels, perhaps 3 or 4 major networks and a local public broadcasting station. Program guides, printed weekly in newspapers or in magazines like TV Guide, were essential for knowing what was on and when. Families might gather around the single television set in the living room to watch popular evening shows together. If you missed an episode, there was no easy way to catch up, unless it was rerun months or years later. VCRs, videocassette recorders, eventually allowed people to record shows or rent movies, which was a major shift. Going to the cinema was a common outing. New movie releases were events often discussed and anticipated. You'd check newspaper listings for showtimes, travel to the theater, buy a ticket and watch the film on a big screen with an audience. Video rental stores became hugely popular. Places like Blockbuster Video offered rows and rows of movies on VHS tapes and later DVDs. Choosing a movie for the weekend was an evening's activity in itself. You'd browse the shelves, read the back of the boxes, and maybe argue a little over the final selection. Late fees for not returning tapes on time were a common frustration. Music was consumed via radio, pylon records, cassette tapes, and later, CDs. Radio stations had DJs who created introducing new songs and artists. You might sit by the radio with a blank cassette finger poised over the record button, hoping to catch your favorite song without the DJ talking over the beginning or end. Buying an album meant a trip to a record store, a place where you could browse bins of LPs or racks of tapes and CDs, often getting recommendations from staff or discovering new music through cover art. Live concerts and theater performances were, of course, major forms of entertainment, requiring tickets purchased in advance, often by phone or at a box office. Board games, card games, and reading books were also very common ways to pass the time, especially for families and friends gathered at home. The simplicity lay in the fewer choices and the scheduled nature of much of it. Entertainment was something you often planned for and experienced at a set time, frequently with others, leading to more shared cultural touchstones. Number 5. News traveled slower, and you had fewer sources. The way people learned about what was happening in the world was a more paced, less overwhelming experience. The primary source of daily news for most was the morning newspaper, delivered to their doorstep, or bought from a newsstand. This paper contained stories written and edited the previous day, offering a snapshot of events that had already transpired. Evening newspapers provided updates on the day's developments. Reading the newspaper was a ritual for many, a way to catch up on local, national, and international affairs over breakfast or on the commute. Television news also played a crucial role. Evening news broadcasts, typically half an hour to an hour long, featured anchors summarizing the main stories of the day with accompanying video footage. These broadcasts were a staple in many households, with trusted news anchors becoming familiar faces. Special reports would interrupt regular programming for truly momentous events, creating a sense of shared national experience. Radio news was important too, especially for updates throughout the day or while driving. Hourly news bulletins and longer news programs kept listeners informed. Weekly news magazines like Time or Newsweek offered more in-depth analysis and feature stories, providing context to the events reported daily. The news cycle was significantly slower. Information was gathered by reporters on the ground, written up, edited by multiple people, and then physically printed or broadcast. There was no constant stream of updates or instant breaking news alerts on a personal device. If something major happened, you might hear about it first on the radio or wait for the evening news or the next day's paper. The sources were also more limited. Most cities had one or two major newspapers. There were a few national television networks. This meant that a large portion of the population was consuming news from a relatively small pool of established journalistic organizations. The simplicity was in this slower pace and the created nature of information. You consumed news at set times from a finite number of sources, which generally had layers of editorial oversight. There was less need to constantly check for updates, and the phenomenon of information overload was not a common concern. Number 4. Learning and research meant libraries, books, and note cards. Acquiring knowledge or conducting research was a journey into the physical world of printed materials. For students of all ages and for anyone curious about a topic, the library was a vital resource. Libraries were quiet, organized repositories of books, journals, encyclopedias, and other reference materials. To find information, you'd start with the card catalog. This was a cabinet, or series of cabinets, filled with small drawers containing index cards. Each card listed a book's title, author, subject, and its Dewey Decimal System number, which told you where to find it on the shelves. You'd meticulously search through these cards, pulling out relevant ones. Once you had your list of potential sources, you'd navigate the stacks, the tall shelves packed with books. Finding the right book often felt like a treasure hunt. Encyclopedias were a cornerstone of research. especially for general information. Sets of these multi-volume books, like the Encyclopedia Britannica or World Book, held articles on a vast array of subjects, written by experts. You'd look up your topic alphabetically and read the relevant entry, taking notes by hand. For more specialized or current information, periodical indexes were used. These were large bound volumes that listed articles published in magazines, journals, and newspapers, organized by subject. You'd find a citation, then locate the bound volume of the periodical, or look for it on microfilm or microfiche. Microfilm and microfiche readers were common library equipment, allowing you to view miniaturized images of documents on a screen. Taking notes was a crucial skill. You'd write down key facts, quotes, and bibliographic information on note cards or in notebooks. Plagiarism was a concern, so careful citation of sources was taught from an early age. The process of research was methodical and often time-consuming. It required patience to locate materials, read through them, and synthesize the information. There was no cutting and pasting. Everything was transcribed by hand, or, if you were lucky enough to have access to one, photocopied. The simplicity was in the focused, linear nature of the task. You dealt with one physical source at a time. The environment of the library, usually quiet and dedicated to study, encouraged concentration. Distractions were fewer, and the physical act of handling books and writing notes fostered a different kind of engagement with the material. Number 3. Social life revolved around physical presence and planned events. Your social world was largely defined by the people you could physically interact with. Making friends and maintaining relationships happened face-to-face, through shared activities or via deliberate, planned communication. School, work, and neighborhoods were primary places for forming connections. You got to know classmates during lessons and breaks, colleagues during work hours or at after-work gatherings, and neighbors to casual encounters on the street or at local community events. Hobbies and clubs were also significant social hubs. Joining a sports team, a book club, a church group, or a volunteer organization meant regularly meeting people with similar interests. These shared activities provided a natural context for friendships to develop. Inviting people over to your home for dinner, a barbecue, or just a cup of coffee was a common way to socialize. Parties, whether for birthdays, holidays, or just for fun, were planned events. Invitations were often sent by mail or delivered by hand or made over the phone. You had to RSVP, so the host knew how many people to expect. Going out meant meeting friends at a restaurant, a bar, a cinema, a concert, or a dance. Spontaneity existed, of course. A last-minute phone call to see if a friend was free. But many social engagements required some level of advanced planning. Keeping up with friends who lived far away involved writing letters or making occasional, sometimes expensive, long-distance phone calls. Visits were significant undertakings, planned well in advance. Community often meant your geographical community. Local events like town fairs, parades, school plays, or bake sales were important social gatherings that brought people together. The simplicity lay in the tangible nature of social interaction. Relationships were built on shared physical presence and direct communication. Your social circle was generally smaller and more localized. There was no corrupted online persona to maintain, and social validation came from direct interactions rather than likes or shares. Misunderstandings were more likely to be resolved through direct conversation. The rhythm of social life was slower, with less pressure for constant connectivity or instant responses. Number 2. Finding love was a local affair, often involving introductions or personal aids. The search for romantic partners was a very different landscape, navigated without apps or websites. Most people met potential partners through their existing social circles, friends of friends, colleagues, classmates, or people they encountered through hobbies or at social gatherings like parties or weddings. Introductions made by mutual acquaintances were common and often considered a good way to meet someone, as there was an element of pre-vetting. Blind dates, set up by well-meaning friends or family, were a familiar trope, sometimes awkward, sometimes successful. The workplace was another common venue for romance to blossom, as people spent a significant amount of time together. Similarly, universities and colleges were places where many long-term relationships began. For those looking beyond their immediate circles, or who were perhaps shyer, personal ads in newspapers or magazines were an option. These were short, text-based advertisements where individuals would describe themselves and the type of person they were hoping to meet. Interested parties would reply via a P.O. box number provided in the ad, initiating a correspondence, usually through letters. This process was slow and anonymous at first, allowing people to get to know each other through writing before deciding to meet in person. Dating agencies also existed, offering a more credited matchmaking service, often involving interviews and profile matching done by staff. These services could be quite expensive. Going steady or being in a committed relationship often involved public rituals, like exchanging school rings or an official asking out for a date. Dates themselves were typically planned events: dinner, a movie, a dance. Communication between dates often relied on phone calls, with the attendant anxieties of waiting for the phone to ring or summoning the courage to make a call. The simplicity was in the localized and more direct nature of courtship. You generally met people who were part of your physical world, or you engaged in a very deliberate, slow-paced process of getting to know someone through written correspondence. There was less overwhelming choice, and interactions were, by necessity, more personal and less mediated by profiles and algorithms. The focus was on getting to know one individual at a time in a more concentrated way. Number 1. Your brain was your primary storage device for trivia and memories. Before you could instantly look up any fact, name, or date, your own memory and the collective memory of those around you played a much more central role in daily life. Remembering phone numbers was a common skill. Many people had dozens committed to memory for home, work, friends, and family. If you didn't know a number, you'd look it up in a physical phone book, a thick tome listing subscribers alphabetically, or call a directory assistance operator. For general knowledge, people relied on what they had learned in school, read in books, or picked up through life experience. If a question arose in conversation, the capital of a country, the year a movie was released, the name of an actor, it might spark a lively debate or a collaborative effort to recall the answer. Sometimes, the answer remained elusive, accepted as a minor mystery. Encyclopedias and dictionaries kept in homes or libraries were the go-to resources for settling such questions, but they required a physical search. Remembering appointments and to-do lists was managed with paper diaries, pocket calendars, or simple sticky notes. Important dates, like birthdays and anniversaries, were often marked on a wall calendar in the kitchen, a central family information hub. Storytelling was a more vital way of preserving and passing on family history and personal memories. Older relatives were often the keepers of these stories, sharing them orally at gatherings. Photographs were precious physical objects, kept in albums or boxes, looked at periodically to reminisce. Each photo told a part of a story, triggering memories associated with that specific moment. Learning a new skill, like cooking a recipe or fixing something around the house, often meant learning from another person directly watching and imitating, or following instructions in a printed manual or cookbook. The simplicity was in the reliance on internal cognitive abilities and direct human interaction for information retrieval and management. There was a greater emphasis on memorization and education. While not everything could be instantly recalled, the process of searching for information or trying to remember something often involved social interaction or a deeper engagement with physical texts, which could reinforce learning and memory in a different way. The brain, supported by tangible tools like notebooks and calendars, was the primary engine for navigating the informational landscape of daily life.